What's happening, YouTube? OM checking in. Today I'm in Vauxhall and I'm bringing you along to an appointment with Adrian from the running room. I've booked in with Adrian just to have my running assessed, and hopefully if I can video some of it, it's going to be beneficial and useful and insightful to some of you. As you all know, I've spoke about it way too much. I'm running a couple of ultras late this year, picking up a few niggles along the way, and just know that my running mechanics and efficiency could be much better. So in true OM fashion, I'm seeking out the professionals. I'm doing all I can to leave no stone unturned. And today I'm going to have my running assessed. Looking forward to finding out what Adrian thinks to my current running techers. And then hopefully some of the stuff we take from today will inform my programming and the way I train going forward. So come along. This is going to be a fairly short episode, but hopefully some insight. So they've all been like arguing over it. His eldest brother's still there. So. Okay, so first up, Adrian got me on the bed testing internal and external rotation of the hips, just a quick assessment. And then he got his dyno out and tested some strength, basically left and right, any compensations, any discrepancies. And what was really interesting is that although my right leg has more muscle mass visibly, my left leg is actually stronger on these tests, which is quite interesting. So that was the first set of tests, and then we moved on to these force decks. What was quite tough to begin with was actually staying on the deck. So we put these little safety bumpers on, and we did 3 sets of 10 kind of pogo jumps or hops. I didn't feel very athletic, to be honest. Then we moved into these depth jumps. So the key here is trying to get on and off the decks as quickly as you can while jumping as high as you can. So not dumping too much force into the decks and not sort of hanging around on the floor too long. So stepping off and then looking to produce as much force as possible. Again, I did a few warm-ups of this, and then we went into 3 max efforts. From there, the final test was then on the running machine. So what's really cool about this running machine is the camera to the rear, and then also Adrian took some footage from the side. Little warm-up to begin with, and then I got up to a kind of my easy running pace. So a pace I could run for sort of 20-25k at easy pace, which is around 5:20. And then we took some video from the side and from behind, looking at where my foot strikes the floor, whether there's any compensations, any hip shift, any hip drop. And then he used this cool app on his phone looking at angles around the knee, around the hip, at the different phases of running. So through the swing phase, through the striking phase, and mid phase of the run. So some really cool data, some really cool reference points, and he picked us on some cool bits and pieces to improve on, namely improving my cadence, which should help kind of hip piece, and then also longer term how I can improve where the foot strikes the floor. But for the time being, I don't want to fuck around with that too much with the upcoming ultras.
Overstriding is that angle between the knee and the ankle. So that shin line, in an ideal situation, you want to have a nice vertical shin line.
Got you.
So the way you would look at this is like, think about like a heavy bicep curl. Like if you took a 30 kilo dumbbell, like that's a heavy curl. But from there to there is tough work. And then once you're in mid-range, you can get a few reps out. Yeah. So when you're in mid-range of like in knee flexion and vertical shin, your quad's in a better place to actually generate momentum and torque. Yeah. Whereas if you're out there, now your quad's all shortened up, you don't really have the ability to actually get that quadricep to stabilize well enough. So the question is on this side is, are we dealing with something which is going to be more related to previous ACL or just regular mechanics? You come in immediately, nice even control. Let's say mid-stance, we'll go back a few frames. Not too bad from like a hip perspective, but so from a glute, sort of like maybe a little bit of hip drop, but that the opposite hip drop dropping a little bit. Knees not caving in too much, which is fine, but I think definitely some sort of glute med instability work and glute med control. So a lot of like single leg control work for stability would be really nice over here for you. And then,
so you want those hips to be square?
Ideally, you want it to be like relatively nice and level. So when you're hitting in the ground, you've got that nice control there. Because what you're going to have is you're going to waste energy. Yeah. So with running, you want to try and limit sort of excessive lateral flexion, rotation. So your anti-rotation, anti-lateral flexion sort of core-based work is working really well. Yeah. Suitcase carries, farmers carries, they're great value. As you come in, but I think that nothing too excessive. You can see here with this side here, like that's relatively quite even if I go side to side there.
Yeah.
So that left hip is actually holding better position. But then it gets irritated. I think that might just come down to maybe a bit of overload, or maybe right side not being as strong. So then your left side ends up taking a bit more force through the hip. It might also be the fact that left knee is not working as hard. So if your knee isn't taking on as much load, then that load has to shift either above or below the chain. So I think we start to get this knee behaving itself a little bit more. That hip will start to get a bit more free as well.
Yeah.
Just run into the core. Actually, not. It's pretty good. Like, I'm always looking at side-to-side asymmetry. So this is your force and pressure when you push off. This is you at contact. So you can see right side is actually your more overall efficient side, which will make sense. That's your happier side as well. So softer on contact, more power on push off. If you look at the overall difference, you've got about a 6% difference here, about 7% there, so 6, 7, 13% asymmetry. So it's probably a little bit more than what we want. I'd say like between 5 and 10 is optimal. Anything 5 and under is awesome. So where I think you're going to get better benefit is trying to minimize this. The softer, the better you are to impact, the less force is going through your body. And we know if we can sort of like play around with metrics like cadence, it can do a lot to minimize overstride. So we look at running and like running related injuries, especially at like levels of knees and things like that. One of the most common things is overstride and pelvic drop, both of what you have. So we can look to address overstride and pelvic drop. The best way to do that is to play cadence. So let's see what your current preferred cadence is.
Yeah.
We know that 5 gives us 20, so research shows that if we increase cadence by 5%, it takes 20% off your forces going through the knee, which is massive when you look at a 100k race and beyond. So, and the good thing about a 5% increase is the metabolic cost is really low. So imagine when you're trying to lift your hip, your hamstrings up, and you can't sustain it. If you try and make a 10% increase in cadence, that metabolic cost is quite high. It doesn't always transfer as well. So we'll try to make maybe a 5 to 7.5% cadence increase, way more sustainable, and you get that sort of benefit that you want as well.
Yeah.
So you're hitting midfoot as well, but mostly heel strike. But you can see over the cross section of everything, this right side is taking on a bit more pressure. That center of pressure butterfly is crossing over onto the right side. So ideally, I'd want it to be on that y-axis there.
Yep.
That's where you want to be. You'll never be over here because that just means you're jumping on the spot, you're not going forwards.
Okay.
And then from a force curve perspective, you can see where your left side's letting you down. So firstly, not producing nearly as much force, quite a significant force difference in terms of force production. But you can see the braking force. When you're making contact, it's not accepting force well enough on this side. And then you have this point where your peak just changes trajectory a bit. And then you ramp back up. And you can see it here as well with pressure. Contact, a bit of a drop off in force and pressure. So you're losing a bit of braking force here. Then you're trying to ramp back up again. Whereas if you look at your right side, there is that change there, but it's not as dramatic. So you're still managing to sort of sustain that quite well. And then from contact in through toe off, which is up there, that's quite nice. And then you start to lose that pressure because your foot's coming off the plate. And then this is all swing phase where your legs not on the ground. So overall, like as we improve cadence, I want to see this metric changing. I want to see this. Basically, I want to see make sure the mirroring and sort of like superimposing on top of each other, looking much the same.
Yeah. So all finished with Adrian. Awesome little setup they have there inside Slevin Gym in Vauxhall is the running room. So Adrian and his team of physios are physios by trade, but also experts in all things running. So we did a couple of assessments using the force decks, having on the bed, and then obviously on the runner. I think the general consensus is that there's a few imbalances and compensatory patterns, particularly as I look to run further, that will rear their ugly head. So a few things to work on. I'm excited to get them into my training program. I want to make a real go of running this year alongside staying jacked and strong and also training for BJJs. The biggest thing for me is being injury free, because I'd hate the thought of all this running putting me out of training. That would be a terrible shame. So big shout out to Adrian. Any of you runners out there, or anyone that wants to go and have their running analysed, it's a useful tool, because I now know how I run, where I need to improve, a few things around cadence that need to be adjusted, and then also, yeah, just to improve foot strike, hip drop, but lots of important stuff. Hopefully this has been useful. It's only a short one. Peace and love.